The next thing I had you all watch is Decolonization, a 3-minute theory. And there's a couple of things I want you to note in this video. What are the two ways we talk about decolonization? He offers that we talk about decolonization in relation to how the once colonized people gain their independence. And then we also talk about decolonization in terms of addressing and redressing the existing kind of remnants of colonialism or the existing aftermath of colonialism. Some settler colonies, he is pretty straightforward. Canada, the US, and Australia are three that he named. Epistemic and material operations of colonialism. Epistemic is at the level of knowledge, how knowledge operates, so how we're still influenced by the schools of thought of European thought, a Eurocentric frame of thought, how colonialism affects how we see reality, our hierarchies in language, our notions, what it means to communicate, our hierarchies around people, our ideas about being collaborative versus being independent, our ideas about how we value particular body types and particular images. All of those are at the epistemic level, right? And then there's the material level of decolonization that is understanding structures of existing power, understanding how our material conditions, remember the term material conditions, are influenced by the material operations of colonialism, right? Those different structures and institutions of power that are affecting our basic everyday needs. WTO is the World Trade Organization, which sets the standards and regulations for global rules on trade between nations. And then the International Monetary Fund is the IMF. And quoting from the film, he says, these two are dominated by Western nations and extort once colonized nations into debt cycles that force them into increasingly dependent spirals of economic subordination. So once colonial powers remove themselves and they allow formerly colonized people to become independent, oftentimes the way they still exact domination is through their economic power. And the World Trade Organization and the International Monetary Fund allow this to happen because they set the rules and regulations for trade and the rules and regulations around money and values of money. So I'll give you something to think about. Africa is one of the richest, or if not the richest, continent in the world. However, the different monetaries, the valuation of African money is very, very, very low. So if you look up the dollar to the rand, which is South Africa's currency, you'll see that the $1 equals 1819 rand. So it's an extremely ridiculous markup for the US dollar. And yet Africa is more richly resourced in gold and diamonds, the things that we constitute how we value money. And yet the International Monetary Fund, that organization, valuates the rand at a much, much lower value than the dollar and the euro, right? So I want you to think about how these things are play into creating that spiral of economic subordination that he's articulating. He argues that decolonization focused on understanding the history of how history produces contemporary. So he argues that decolonization focuses on how our histories of colonial rule produce contemporary knowledge sets, produce contemporary material conditions. So things that are happening today are linked to and are happening because of the history of colonialism and the continued the continued maintenance of colonial oppression through other means, particularly economic means and knowledge sources. And then sovereignty is self-governance. The primary concern of active people who are seeking decolonization is sovereignty or self-governance from colonial rules, and that means from schools of thought to economic control to restoration and removal of European power from land that has been dispossessed. All right, so I'll end this one here. This is only a 3 minute, 15-second or so video. So I'll end this one here and we will do the final video.